The commingling of regiments brought groups of battle flags near together. Soon, there was an apparent rivalry as to whose flag should lead. All of them were pushed to the front and then advanced by short stages, each striving to lead. By this time, the assaulting troops were in triangular masses in every ravine and gorge, each detachment headed by a group of flags, followed by tired, perspiring, panting, thirsty, but resolute soldiers. Hi, my name is Bill Coughlin, and host of First Person Civil War podcast. While the generals of both sides get most of the recognition, the Civil War was fought by the men in the ranks, and they told their stories during and after the war. Follow me as I reveal what these men witnessed in the battles of the Civil War. Episode 46 is entitled First Lieutenant Charles T. Clark in the 125th Ohio at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, and relies on his book, Opdyke Tigers, 125th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, A History of the Regiment and of the Campaigns and Battles of the Army of the Cumberland, which he published in 1895. Charles Theodore Clark was born on 17 January 1845 in Dalton, Ohio, and lived in Liberty Township during his childhood. After attending Mount Union College for 2 years, he enlisted as a first sergeant in Company I, 85th Ohio, on 26 May 1862. The 85th Ohio was intended to have a strength of 10 companies, like most Civil War regiments, but was only able to muster 4 companies for service in Camp Chase. On 23 September 1862, the 85th Ohio disbanded. But men like Charles T. Clark were able to transfer to other regiments forming around Cleveland, Ohio. On 24 September 1862, the very next day, Charles T. Clark accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in Company F of the 125th Ohio. The 125th Ohio derived their nickname, the Opdyke Tigers, from their first commander, Colonel Emerson Opdyke. Present at the First Battle of Bull Run and Shiloh, Colonel Opdyke formed the 125th Ohio and commanded the regiment through the Battle of Chickamauga and into the Siege of Chattanooga in late 1863. The 125th Ohio was part of the Army of the Cumberland, who in September 1863 were met with defeat at the hands of General Braxton Bragg and his Army of Tennessee at the Battle of Chickamauga. Following the battle, the Army of the Cumberland retreated to the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and established defensive positions. General Bragg and the Army of Tennessee occupied key terrain features around the city of Chattanooga. There was Lookout Mountain to the southwest, which had a commanding view of the city, and Missionary Ridge, approximately 330 feet elevation, to the east. Throughout the remainder of September and October, the Confederates laid siege to now First Lieutenant Clark, the 125th Ohio, and the Army of the Cumberland. As soon as the exterior lines of works was complete, an interior line was laid out, intended to enable a small force to hold the town where the main body operated elsewhere, and the troops took regular turns at labor upon the new works. The deprivation of full rations was on that account more seriously felt. Half rations only were issued. Before long, even that scanty supply became uncertain. Chattanooga during the Civil War was a logistics hub and the key to future operations of the Union and Confederate armies. The Tennessee River flowed through the city, and it was also a hub for 4 separate railroads that linked the South together. Though besieged, Union reinforcements began converging upon Chattanooga, which included the Army of the Tennessee, fresh from its victory at Vicksburg, and 2 corps from the Army of the Potomac. What followed was a series of battles on the periphery of Chattanooga, where the Union solidified its supply lines into the city, known as the Cracker Line. During those 2 months of siege, 3 men from the 125th Ohio died. But eventually, conditions within the city began to improve for First Lieutenant Clark and his regiment. On November 2nd, the rations were increased from 1/2 to 2/3 the regular allowance. On the 16th, Company I arrived from Ohio with 3 officers and 80 men, who were most heartily welcomed to the ranks of the 125th, and a full share of short rations and arduous duties. By late November 1863, the Union buildup of troops was now complete, and First Lieutenant Clark and the 125th Ohio were assigned to the 3rd Brigade, commanded by Colonel Charles G. Harker, of Major General Philip H. Sheridan's 2nd Division, of Major General Gordon Granger's 4th Corps, and Major General George H. Thomas's Army of the Cumberland, which was alongside the Army of the Tennessee and Hooker's command, which comprised the Military Division of the Mississippi, commanded by Major General Ulysses S. Grant. First Lieutenant Clark and the 125th Ohio departed their fortifications alongside the Army of the Cumberland on 23 November to push Confederate lines up against Missionary Ridge. Then, over in the direction of Fort Wood, a bugle sounded, "Advance!" and instantly the peaceful pageant changed to the tragedy of battle. With a shout, the skirmishers ran forward, followed by the lines marching in quick time. Down went the Confederates into their pits and opened fire. The distance from Fort Wood to Orchard Knob was a little over 1 mile. Extending from the knob to the right and left, the enemy had rifle pits, to which their picket reserves and possibly other troops near at hand were thrown and made a vigorous but hopeless resistance. On 24 November, Major General Hooker's command, which were the 2 transferred corps from the east, seized Lookout Mountain from Confederate hands in what became known as the Battle Above the Clouds. The next day, 25 November, Major General Sherman's Army of the Tennessee was tasked with advancing on the Confederate fortifications on Missionary Ridge from the north, while Major General Thomas's Army of the Cumberland were to advance in the center up Missionary Ridge in support. Despite the Union advances on 23 November, the Confederates still held defensive positions at the base and summit of Missionary Ridge. Major General William B. Bate, commander of Breckinridge's division, made preparations for the expected Union advance. By repeated application from the front, representing the picket force there without support on the left, I was induced, upon consultation with the Corps commander, to send the 7th Florida Regiment, that came from the brigade immediately in front of First Lieutenant Clark and the 125th Ohio, as a reserve to our picket line. This little force, under the frown of such a horrid front, remained defiant, and, in obedience to orders, maneuvered handsomely amid the perils of capture until, by order, it found a lodgment in the trenches at the foot of Missionary Ridge. Knowing the disadvantage under which the line, strung out without reserves on the summit of the ridge, would labor in resisting with a plunging fire the advance of 3 strong lines, I ordered that it hold the trenches at all hazards. While the Floridians prepared for the inevitable advance upon their positions, First Lieutenant Clark provided a soldier's opinion of the Confederate defenses they were about to assault. The position, strength, and arrangement of Thomas's line being open to observation of the enemy from the crest, Bragg was able to prepare deliberately, and to place in position all of the troops deemed necessary for the safety of the position. The summit of the ridge was almost level and narrow in places. The slopes were rugged and difficult. The timber had been cleared along the front, giving the enemy's guns unobstructed range. At the start of the advance, Colonel Harker arranged the 3rd Brigade in 4 lines. The 42nd Illinois served as skirmishers for the entire brigade. In the first line was the 27th Illinois, 3rd Kentucky, and 64th Ohio. 300 yards to the rear was the second line, with the 22nd and 51st Illinois, as well as the 65th and 125th Ohio. 200 yards further back was the rear line, with the 79th Illinois. Now arrayed for the assault, what followed was not fully intended, but led to the taking of Missionary Ridge by 1st Lieutenant Clark, the 125th Ohio, and the Army of the Cumberland en masse. When the movement commenced, the 125th was immediately behind the 64th Ohio. All were ordered to conform to the movement of the command next on the left. At the given signal, the lines advanced, marching quick step, then double quick, and finally running. On arriving at the rifle pits, the 65th and 125th passed on without halting and closed up with the first line. Passing over a swell in the ground where the fire was very hot. At this point, the brigade halted and even fell back to stabilize its line. It was then noticed that the troops on the right were still advancing, but already near the second line of rifle pits, which extended across their front, but not to extend to ours. The troops to the right of 1st Lieutenant Clark was Colonel Francis T. Sherman's 1st Brigade. Consisting mostly of Illinois regiments, it also contained 1 Indiana regiment, 2 Missouri regiments, and the 24th Wisconsin. After seizing the flag of the 24th, which fell to the ground at some point in the advance, 1st Lieutenant Arthur MacArthur, Jr. rallied the regiment and shouted, "On Wisconsin!" and continued the advance. Witnessing 2 of his 3 brigades moving forward, Major General Sheridan rode up to the 3rd Brigade to get them to advance again. I rode from the center to the left, saw disappointment in the faces of the men, told them to rest for a few moments, and they should go at it again. 1st Lieutenant Clark corroborates this story of Major General Sheridan as well. As he passed the 125th, he said, "It's all right, boys. When you catch your breath, you can go on again." Instantly, the order was given by Captain Bates. 125th, forward! The order was promptly obeyed. Brigadier General Bate, directing his division upon the crest of the ridge, witnessed the pause of the 3rd Brigade in their advance and tried to take advantage of the stalled column. A well-directed and effective fire having been opened on their advancing line, handsomely repulsed it, throwing a portion of it behind our vacated trenches and precipitated others on their second line, which, being out of range of small arms, I ordered the firing to cease and the line to fall back a few paces to replenish ammunition and give the artillery an unobstructed sweep. Order was soon restored in the ranks of the enemy, and another onward movement made in systematic and defiant style. The Army of the Cumberland continued its advance up Missionary Ridge, but due to the rugged terrain, all semblance of a formation broke down. It was the determination of 1st Lieutenant Clark, the 125th Ohio, and thousands of others that drove the men toward the crest of the ridge. The commingling of regiments brought groups of battle flags near together. Soon, there was an apparent rivalry as to whose flag should lead. All of them were pushed to the front and then advanced by short stages, each striving to lead. By this time, The assaulting troops were in triangular masses in every ravine and gorge, each detachment headed by a group of flags, followed by tired, perspiring, panting, thirsty, but resolute soldiers. Following his men up the ridge was Major General Sheridan, still coordinating the advance as best he could. Captain Avery of General Granger's staff here came up and informed me that the original order was to carry the first line of pits, but that if, in my judgment, the ridge could be taken, to do so. My judgment was that it could be carried, and orders were given accordingly, obeyed with a cheer, and the ridge was carried. The right and center reached the summit first, being nearest to the crest, crossing it to the right of General Bragg's headquarters. Within this first column to the crest of Missionary Ridge was 1st Lieutenant Clark and the 125th Ohio. Our change of direction to the right brought us to the crest a short distance to the right, our right, of Bragg's headquarters. Part of the 125th, together with the advance men of other regiments, helped clear out the enemy still clinging to the battery and breastworks, near and at the right of the house. 1st Lieutenant Clark and the 125th Ohio advanced down the eastern face of Missionary Ridge, where they eventually met the Confederate rear guard. After a brief engagement, the enemy to their front departed, and the Ohioans went into bivouac. While Sherman's advance in the north was thwarted, the charge of the Army of the Cumberland was a complete success. With its center shattered, the Army of Tennessee was forced to retreat from Chattanooga. Though Major General Grant desired a pursuit of the Confederates into Georgia, he eventually called it off following the successful rearguard action of Major General Patrick Cleburne at the Battle of Ringgold Gap. Search episode 25 of the podcast for an account from that battle. From his headquarters on Orchard Knob, Major General Grant was initially surprised to see the continued assault of the Army of the Cumberland. According to his original orders, they were to stop at the rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge. Charles Clark provides his own explanation as to why the men did not stop the charge. The storming of Missionary Ridge is often spoken of as the special work of the rank and file, because it was begun without orders and carried on finally without much organization, the bravest and strongest, especially the latter leading, but all going as fast as physical strength permitted. It should not be forgotten, however, that Sheridan sent an aide to Granger, asking permission to try for the crest at the moment the signal was given for the advance, and that none of the general officers gave explicit orders to stop at the first line of works, and also that the division and brigade commanders went up with their men. Thank you for listening to the 46th episode. Links to 1st Lieutenant Clark's book and to social media accounts are now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find a picture of 1st Lieutenant Clark in 1863. In 2 weeks' time, Private John Overton Castler of Company A, 33rd Virginia, provides next episode's first-person account, as he stood with Jackson like a stone wall at the First Battle of Bull Run. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.